Arousal is the intensity of the behaviour. It refers to the degree of emotion that someone is feeling. There are two elements of arousal: somatic and cognitive. Somatic arousal is when there is a changing state of your body, of how you physically feel. For instance, there is an increase in heart rate, blood pressure, and respiratory rates, and adrenaline, whereas cognitive arousal is psychological based. It can happen moment to moment and consists of having negative thoughts and questioning one's ability in the sports that they play. Arousal can have positive and negative impacts on an athlete's sporting performance. It just depends on the individual and the level of arousal that they normally experience to drive their performance. Each individual has an optimum level of arousal that enables them to perform at the best of their ability. Also, if we take juggling as an example, a novice learner might struggle with high levels of arousal because they might not be confident with the skill that they are performing. However, an autonomous learner is more likely to do better with high levels of arousal, as they are more confident at performing the skill of juggling. In addition, the quality of the performance depends on how well the skill has been learnt. The drive theory tries to explain how an athlete's performance can be affected by the level of arousal they experience. The theory states that if you increase the level of arousal, then your performance levels will increase. In connection to this, your dominant response is the motor program that has already learned and will usually become evident when arousal is raised, therefore increasing the level of performance. An example where the drive theory has successfully explained someone's performance levels increasing is at the 2018 Commonwealth Games in Australia in the netball final. Helen Housby is an England netballer and she plays in the position of goal attack. In the last seconds of the match, she had to take the winning shot. She most likely experienced somatic arousal, and there were heightened levels of arousal around her. She took the penalty shot and scored, therefore implying that because of the heightened levels of arousal, her performance levels increased, as they had won the gold medal for England. Also, her dominant response played a role in her achieving an increased level of performance, because she knew the technique of the skill perfectly, so therefore with high levels of arousal executed the skill perfectly. However, there is a criticism to this theory, and it is that the theory doesn't explain why some elite athletes fail under high levels of arousal. If you take Gareth Southgate, for example, he was an elite athlete, but in the Euros in 1996, even though levels of arousal were high, he still missed the penalty that would have taken England through to the final of the competition. So this contradicts the drive theory, because Southgate should have scored the penalty, as the high levels of arousal should have boosted his level of performance. So he should have scored. The inverted U theory. This theory suggests that there is an optimum level of arousal that people have to experience in order for their performance to be perfect. But if they don't experience this optimum level, then there can be a decrease in their sporting performance. Point A is under-arousal, and this suggests that if an athlete experiences low levels of arousal, then the athlete's concentration will be limited, which will result in them not paying attention to the relative cue. The relative cue is what you're supposed to be focusing on. So this could be the ball when trying to catch it in rugby, for example. Therefore, with limited concentration, this means that the athlete is more likely to make a mistake, so the level of their performance will decrease. However, at point B is optimum arousal. This is where the athlete's concentration is perfect, so their arousal levels are just right and suitable to that individual, so that their performance levels increase. This means that they are paying attention to all aspects of the game and are completely focused. In contrast to this, point C is over-arousal, and this is where an athlete doesn't pay attention to the whole game. They are hypervigilant and are in what is known as a blind panic. This is where the athlete loses the ability to focus on the whole game. This can occur at any stage throughout a sporting event. Going back to rugby, if one player from the opposition is able to get past you 2 or 3 times, you might become too distracted and miss the bigger picture of the game by purely focusing on tackling one player. This in turn decreases performance levels as you might miss crucial opportunities to tackle other members of the opposing team because you are too focused on one player. There is one factor with this theory, and it is that depending on the skill depends on the level of arousal you need. For example, in a sport like snooker, the athlete will need low levels of optimum arousal than an athlete playing football. This is because snooker players need to focus on one relevant cue, whereas a football player has lots of aspects of the game to take into consideration. A criticism for this theory is the shape of the graph. It shows a slow increase to optimum level of arousal, and then shows a slow increase to high levels of arousal, but then performance decreasing. But normally within a sporting situation, the transitions between the levels of arousal are very quick. For instance, you could have low levels of arousal before a netball match, but as soon as the whistle blows and you receive the first centre pass, your levels of arousal can quickly increase to optimum. So there's a quick transition. The catastrophe theory, the theory describes how if someone makes a mistake within their sport, then they can have a catastrophe, and your performance levels can go either way. It can get worse or it can get better. But the theory shows that sometimes, even though an athlete's arousal levels are high, their performance levels are still low. On the graph, the initial catastrophe indicates that the performance levels have dropped. An example where an athlete hasn't been able to increase their performance levels after a catastrophe is at a championship golf game. The athlete was 4 or 3 shots ahead of everyone else. So he had 4 or 3 shots in hand, and he made one bad shot, so his performance level slightly decreased. And then he made another one and another one, and eventually he lost the championship. So after the catastrophe, he wasn't able to bring his performance levels back up, even though he had high levels of arousal. He wasn't able to increase his performance levels to win the championship. Whereas Mo Farah was able to win a race after he had a catastrophe. He fell over in the race, which obviously decreased his performance levels, but he was able to increase performance levels and eventually win the race, so reversing the catastrophe.